Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Barcelona Podcast. Dan Hilton and Francesc here, of course, from barcablog.com, bringing you all the hottest breaking stories from the Camp Nou. If you are new here, we consider subscribing, and at any point during the podcast, please check out the links and the exclusive deals that we have shared with you in the description. Now, let's get started. Francesc, the big question we keep getting all this week involved Arsenal's right back in Hector Bellerin, and everybody basically asks, should Barcelona go all in? And it reminds me a few years ago, Francesc, of when Cesc Fabregas of Arsenal was the guy that just seemed to be the never-ending transfer rumor, and this year it looks like it's going to be Arsenal right back Bellerin.
Yeah, definitely. It really does sound like it's going to be a repeat. It really does sound that we're going to have Bellerin for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day. But to be honest, it's a good rumor to have. Bellerin is a fantastic player. At 22 years old, he's already very, very experienced. He's played 114 matches for Arsenal and a total of 41 this season. He's been successful, obviously, in England and around the world, really. Everyone always sort of tends to be joking about Arsenal's results, the fact that they can never get past fourth in the Premiership. But beyond that, he's been successful in the Cups particularly. He's proven himself at the highest level. He's a really, really speedy player. I think that is something that Barca has been lacking at right back for many, many years now. And that is something that we could definitely do with. Given his pace, he can take opposition defenders. He can run past them. He can basically play the ball around them because of his great touch as well. And what I really like about Bellerin is that he will be able to go all the way to the byline, and when he does cross the ball, he's very accurate. Obviously, we can't forget that he's one of our own. He grew up at Barca, joined La Masia when he was still really young. I believe he was 9 and 10 years old. And so he knows La Masia really well. He knows the Barca system really well. And he's a player that has been successful at every level that he's played. So, yeah, I think he would be a great addition.
Yeah, I think you look at what he's done this year in England, and you touched on his story. He left the Barcelona Academy in 2011 as a 16-year-old winger, and as what we see with so many in world football now, they start as wingers and they get converted back to the back line. But he did that when he was, still in his mid-teens, 16, 17. He's currently valued at 25 million euro, according to Transfermarkt, after his 1 goal, 4 assists for Arsenal's first team this season. So WhoScored.com, which is a statistic resource we use often here on the Barcelona Podcast, they give him an average rating of the year of 6.82. But my one question on that, Francesc, is how much better is he than Sergi Roberto or a healthy Vidal? Vidal this year was hurt basically all the year. Two goals, 3 assists, average match rating, though, of 7.45 out of 10. He had particularly good games in the games here. He scored the 2 goals this year. In January, if you remember, against Las Palmas, and then in Bilbao in February. I mean, he showed that if he was healthy, he'll be 28 years old, will Vidal, this season. He showed just how he could fit into that starting 11. So, I mean, the question is, if 25 million being valued, that tells you that it's going to cost a whole lot more to pry him away from Arsenal.
Yeah, but I think it would be money well spent. Now, as I said at the start, he's 22 years old, and he's already made an impact at professional level. He's only going to get better. And Barca and the world of football in general is investing very heavily in youngsters. Now, we don't necessarily look at Madrid all the time, but they're spending a huge amount of money. I think it's in the range of 60 to 65 million euros on Vinicius, which is a Brazilian youngster. He's 16. So if Madrid can spend that much money on a player that is virtually unproven, spending some more money for Bellerin, it makes total sense. Now, coming back to your point about being a right back at Barca at this moment in time. Now, Dani Alves was outstanding. As we said in our previous podcast, he's probably the best right back in the last 10, 20 years in world football. Now, that time is gone, and we need to move forward, which is why last season Barca invested heavily on Vidal as well, who had been excelling in Sevilla. And that should have solved the problem. However, he didn't necessarily adapt to Barca from the beginning. he had trouble with Luis Enrique, who wasn't really playing him too much. And when he was trying to find his way into the team, and our previous manager, Luis Enrique now, because obviously we signed Valverde, when he started showing some more trust in him, then he got injured, and his progression did stop. Now, fortunately, we've had Sergi Roberto starting at right back whenever Vidal wasn't available, which pretty much has been the whole season. And he's done fairly well. He's done really well. However, given Barca's sort of weaknesses in midfield, it would be important in the coming season to have Sergi Roberto challenging for a central midfielder or attacking midfielder position, and having Bellerin as a starter and Vidal as a backup, or either way, both of them challenging each other, would make the Barca team stronger. So from my point of view, it makes perfect sense to add a player who should be an automatic start in our starting 11.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Sergi Roberto. He was the guy this year. He made over 50 appearances, and some were in midfield, but generally he was at right back. And that was actually the position where statistically he was better this year in Roberto, I'm saying. He had a rating of just under 7, so that would be in the middle of Vidal and Bellerin. But of course, look at sample size, and Bellerin's sample size and average minutes and things like that per game were a little bit higher than the other two. This year, Roberto scored 2 goals and 6 assists. And the other thing, though, is Roberto's the player, I think, of the three, for me, that fits the Barcelona system, as you were talking about, the best. While Bellerin, we believe, would adapt well, Roberto is by far the best passer of the three. So, I mean, talking about passing out of the back, Roberto is still the player for that. But as you and I have talked about before, we both, and so many people, see that Sergi Roberto is absolutely worthy of being a Barcelona squad member, but nobody really truthfully believes that he is the long-term solution at the right back position. Now, as far as the transfer of Bellerin that I would bring up is that, again, for me, it comes down to price at the end of the day, where you look at Valencia's Cancelo, who's just 1 year older. He's valued at 20 million compared to the 25 from Bellerin. But also, if we have a relationship already with Valencia. You look at some of the transfers recently, Munir going that way and Gomez coming this way, as well as a bunch of others. And I would say that Cancelo, I mean, you could get him for what, maybe half the price? Because that in the Premier League, Arsenal's going to drive the price up. And then Nelson Semedo, the guy who seems to be, that everyone's talking about from Benfica, the Portuguese right back, he's valued at 14 million. But as we heard, Benfica are going to charge through the roof for Semedo, just knowing that, I think that's what Benfica's transfer policy is. It's to, put high and huge price tags. So I think, for me, if it's Semedo or Bellerin, and they're both going to cost over 40 or 50 million, then you go the way of Bellerin, of course, because, again, you bring him back to Catalonia and kind of forget about Semedo. But Bellerin's always said that his future is going to be tied to Arsene Wenger. And after thinking that Arsene Wenger was going to be leaving Arsenal finally after all these years, he signed a 2-year extension. And I think that might be the nail in the coffin, that Bellerin is just going to cost too much. I mean, that's the thing. If you're telling me 30 million for Bellerin, I say, yeah, I'll sign that. I would love that. That'd be great. But then you say 70 or 75 million for a right back, and you have to look at where Barcelona's priorities are in terms of important signings this summer. Is right back really the most important $70 million transfer that's necessary for the club?
I would say that the problem with Barca's transfer policy is not necessarily playing too highly for transfers. It's the fact that they cannot really sell players for any decent value. If you think about it, the current squad, you've got Arda Turan, who we spoke before, I think should be in his way out. If we could get, say, 30, 35 million, basically what he costed when he got him, for him, that would be great. We've got other players that we could consider offloading, for example, and I know this is sort of a topic that we'll talk about in our next podcast, but someone like Rafinha, if you were to sell him, you would make a good 25, 30 million out of that. Then that's 60 million you got back for two players who, don't improve what Bellerin would bring. So in my eyes, investing 50 million euros on Bellerin is money well spent, because then you've got a right back for the next 10 years. If you think about it, it's the sort of Ter Stegen sort of approach. You buy Ter Stegen, you got a keeper for 10 years. You buy, when we got Jordi Alba from Valencia, then you've got a starting player or someone who could challenge for a starting spot for the next 7-8 seasons. And I think investing heavily in players that are going to be part of your core for years to come would be a great investment. And Bellerin, without a doubt, would be a regular starter. And I think that would be money superbly well spent. But as I said, Barca don't seem to be able to sell players for any decent value, and that's what's holding us back. And if we think about it, Barca and Winterpool, we've got a decent amount of income coming from all sorts, definitely from the TV rights in La Liga and the Champions League, but a budget of around 70, 80 million just because of what the club generates is normal. Add 60 million for sales that you've made, that's 140 million. We could get Bellerin and Berratti this season, for example, and then we're laughing. But it's the fact that this current board don't seem to be able to sell players is frustrating, to be honest.
Well, the last question that I'd pose to you, Francis, as we wrap this question up is, if Bellerin does make the switch back to Spain, back to Barcelona, his boyhood club, and he doesn't succeed right away, like a Cesc Fabregas, and it seems like his heart may not completely be in it, because that's what he said recently, is that my heart is at Arsenal, I want to be at Arsenal with Wenger, and so, but if he were to make that switch and he doesn't succeed, do you think fans, particularly at the stadium, will give him the hard end of the deal and not be patient with a 22-year-old right back to adapt back into that system?
Yeah, I would see why you're asking that, because when Cesc Fabregas came back, we definitely had high hopes of his return, but then he just didn't deliver. But the thing with Fabregas is that he didn't always seem too bothered. He wasn't a player that you could sort of see that was giving everything to the team and was sort of going out of his way to defend or to track back or sort of connecting with the others. Now, Bellerin is a completely different player. He's made out of energy. Is that he had, incredibly great Witos for breakfast. He's always running up and down. He's incredibly pacey. He's incredibly strong, very gifted. And if there's one thing that Bellerin is fantastic at, is giving his all at every given point. And at the Camp Nou, it doesn't matter how much we actually pay for players and signings. If you can see they're trying their best, then we will support them. Always. Like Mascherano. Mascherano is not the most gifted player in the universe. However, he leaves his parts on the in the middle of the park every single game, and we love him for that. He's not going to score a hat trick. He's not going to do all sort of dribbling and sort of showboating and bits like that. But we don't care. We just want people in our team who are going to give everything. And Bellerin, if he chose to come back and the deal was right for both clubs, would be a great addition. And I don't see it as a repeat of the Fabregas fiasco at all.
Well, that takes us to our question number 2 of the day. Our second big question is, how many signings does Barcelona need to make this summer, and which positions should they focus on? Frances, to me, it's pretty simple, and we've kind of been talking about it, and the names that you keep mentioning, and I guess we don't want to get too overzealous in deciding that's what, since that's what we want, that's what's going to happen. But you and I both keep saying that it's Verratti and Bellerin, and that kind of tells you what kind of positions that I would like to see. I think Barcelona is 2 signings away, and it's, again, a top-level midfielder and a right back. So that kind of tells you the story that I think the answer is 2 to that question, but I've got a little bit of a hitch after that for you, but I'd like to hear your answer too.
Oh, no, I agree with you. I think given the transfer transfer money available we've got, I think 2 players. One of the main criticisms that Luis Enrique has faced over his team at Barca is the fact that he hasn't promoted La Masia players as much as he should. And culés could always keep talking about the fact that, in the times of Guardiola, you had Puyol, Xavi, and then obviously you got Busquets, Pedro, and all sorts of players coming through. And at this moment in time, main criticism is that we just haven't had that. So I think signing 2 players that would be starters, like Bellerin and Verratti, would be a great, great deal. Then players who are at the moment backup players, such as André Gomez, Rafinha, if he wasn't sold, Alcácer, they should step up. And I think the rest of the squad players, should come from Barca B in my eyes. But I like to see what you've got in store. So what's your point now?
So I would say that it's not a need, but I think the Barcelona board needs to take a hard look at investing in the future, as you had just talked about in the last question, with kind of what Real Madrid is doing, a lot of what those large clubs are doing. So I think between Iniesta, Busquets, Rakitic, Turan, Rafinha, Gomez, Denis Suarez, Sergi Roberto, Sergi Samper likely returning, and Carlos Alenia needing time from the academy from Barcelona B. With all those guys in the midfield, if nothing seems to happen with enough players going out and a major midfielder coming in and there is money to spend, I would say now might be the summer where you take a hard look at replacing some of the long-term positions. And for me, that starts with getting a quality young, and I do mean very young, teenage number 9 to eventually try to replace Luis Suarez in a few years. And so I think there are guys in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, South America, and the name that comes to my mind first, and this is not a transfer rumor, nothing has ever been said of this, but you look at a player for a Racing Club, Lautaro Martinez, as he's a prototypical number 9, 19 years old, and he's only rated for 2.5 million euro. And again, at 19, you snag a young guy like that, and then you loan him right back to the club for a year. Then you put him on loan in Europe for a year or two, and then slowly integrate him into the first team. Maybe he spends his second season at Barcelona B if they can get back to the second division. And then if he winds up not panning out, you then sell him and make a profit, obviously, because of how rated he had been. So I think this could be the summer that if Barcelona doesn't wind up spending major money on a midfielder because they believe they have all the proper midfielders they need for those three positions, now might be the summer to spend on a young unknown and take a chance on a $8 to $10 million transfer for a young player that you don't necessarily have at the club next year, but you loan him out and work him into the first team slowly throughout the years.
That makes perfect sense to me, but I just don't think that the current Barca board have the skills to do that. They've never done it before. They have never sort of shown having the patience or sort of the know-how to attract players like that. And unfortunately, what's traditionally happened in the last 5-10 years is that Sevilla would be doing that. A club like, say, Chelsea would be doing that. And then the Barca board will go and pay huge amounts of money for this player once they spend a couple of seasons in Sevilla. And then rather than paying the 2.5 million that you were talking about, then we're offering 30 or 40. So as we've spoken about before in our previous podcast, which I really recommend that our listeners sort of go back and listen to if they haven't, because this is episode 5 of our podcast. I think that they really should go back and have a listen. And in terms of the board, is understanding that you're not going to be able to sign players that are going to make instant starters the whole time, but having a transfer policy that attracts talent and then loans them to different clubs should be working, because it is working for other clubs. But we just don't seem to be able to do it.
And that brings us to our quickfire fan mail of the day. And a lot of our questions, obviously, Francesc, are surrounding transfer rumors, and that happens at the beginning of every summer. And it seems like the guy today, and it really is, who is it today? Today it seems to be Ousmane Dembele of Borussia Dortmund. They've got a managerial change, so Dembele might be looking at, is his future at the club? Now, the answer is yes. He's one of the very best young wingers and attackers in the world. So Dembele's place is basically at any club he wants to be at. But of course, his decision, he's stated that he does love the club Barcelona. He wanted to play for them when he was younger and little. I mean, by younger, I mean even earlier in his teenage years, because of course he's still a teenager now. And so how much weight is there in the Dembele rumors? I think in the year 2017 summer window, not much weight is in there. But I think how much long-term weight is in the Dembele rumors, just like we talk about Juventus and Dybala, I think there's a lot of weight in eventually seeing Dembele in a Barcelona uniform.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't think that, as you're saying, is the right time for either Dembele or Dybala, for that matter, to move to Barca, simply because we've got, in my eyes, the best 3 forwards in the world. I mean, Lionel Messi is head and shoulders above, despite whatever that guy in Madrid tends to be doing in Champions League finals. But in my eyes,
Oh, the Portuguese, the Portuguese winger.
Yeah, the Portuguese guy. Yeah, I think number 7 for some white club. Yeah, I think he's still head and shoulders above every other player because of what he brings to the table in terms of not just goal scoring, but also making his team better. So, yeah, I don't think forwards is not what Barca need right now. So I would say give it 2-3 years until, say, Luis Suarez starts sort of declining a bit. Neymar should, in theory, only get better with time. And I see Messi continue to excel for the next 2-3 seasons. Maybe, when his skills and speed and stamina and fitness decreases, he's going to be one of our attacking midfielders, I would say. So we don't necessarily need a forward right now, but give it 2-3 years, and we may be changing our horizons.
Yeah, because I think ideally, as we talked about before, as Messi ages, he moves into that attacking midfield position, so that leaves a hole on the right wing.
Shall I ask you question 4?
Well, that question came from Joe, and this next question comes from the future. And he asked, why is it that Barca are always in the top 3 richest and valuable teams when it's buying players, but then you can't seemingly see them spending money on what he believes that the team needs? And then why can't they seem to fit players in who, haven't come from the club? And then he mentions Coutinho from Liverpool, Verratti, Bellerin, Dembele, Dybala, guys we've already mentioned. And he says those are the guys we need the most, and why doesn't Barcelona go out and get them?
Right. I sort of disagree with the question in itself. Barca spent really heavily on players. If you think about it, Luis Suarez didn't come to us for free. Neymar definitely didn't come to us for free. We still don't even know how much we paid because all of the tax dodginess that is going on behind the scenes. But Barca have invested very heavily. The thing is, in the last couple of years, the signings, I would say beyond Umtiti and Ter Stegen, really, haven't necessarily been as good as they should have been. And that may be because of youth, that may be because of adaptation, and that may be because they just need more time to excel. But I think spending the money is not the problem. It's spending the money in the right number of players and the right players themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. I think targeting needs is the most important thing, but I think, as I kind of mentioned earlier, that while Barcelona seemingly has this well of money that they can just spend and it reaches no end on how much money they can spend, there is a limit. Of course, when you talk about the financial, the FFPs or the financial fair play rules, Barcelona can only spend a certain amount of money, and they should only spend a certain amount of money, particularly when they're looking at building a new stadium or making additions, should we say, as well. So when you look at the money that stadium money needs to be set aside for, it's not prudent to spend on a player, particularly if that player winds up flopping. And it's always a big chance. And you talk about, the players that the future had mentioned, you put all them in the same transfer window, and I know that obviously it would only be one or two of them, but those total those players are going to cost 500 million, 550 million. It's just a huge number.
It's not sustainable to be spending that much money on players all the time. Let's not forget, we're not Real Madrid at all. We are a team that traditionally has been successful, and we have been successful because of promoting our own players. So if you spend a lot of money on a player that is not going to be a starter, then you're quite likely going to end up in a situation like what we found recently, is that players within the academy won't have enough playing time, they won't have enough trust, and they won't have enough opportunity to become the Pujols, Xavis, Iniestas of the future. So if you're going to spend heavily, then you should just go for proven starters. And I don't necessarily agree with this tendency that it has been quite sort of evident in the Catalan media lately, saying that Barca needs to go and sign sort of bench players. I disagree. Bench players should just be players that are ours, that could eventually, from our academy, that could eventually be pushing for a starting position. I don't think having a player that, like Arda Turan, for example, that has done next to nothing, makes any sense from the sporting or the financial perspective.
Yeah, I think that's what everybody seems to be asking, Francesc, and that's your answer to it, is that why can't Barcelona spend on quality players? And the answer is they are. And particularly with a new manager, I think you have to give Valverde a chance to see who plays well underneath him. And as we've talked about in prior weeks, for me, if Denis Suarez is able to take that next step under Valverde, I mean, maybe Denis Suarez just needs that coach to get the best out of him, because he's a guy that we see so many good flashes. And so this might be the year that, he's still in his early 20s, that a lot of these guys, and even at left back, if Digne comes in and starts to really succeed under Valverde, you've got to give this manager a chance. So, I mean, I'm thinking that, yeah, you could splash all this money and we'll say bring in the players that Valverde dreams of or wants so badly, but really there's quality players in the squad, and I'm very curious to see what Valverde does with the players already there in training.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time to be a Barca fan right now. We've got a new manager coming in with plenty of energy, plenty of know-how. He's got a slightly different style, although possession football and attacking football is still going to be at the forefront. But it is a great time for our youth players, particularly, to be able to prove their worth. And if they are good enough, and they've got the right attitude, they should be getting a chance. So it's exciting times ahead.
Yeah, it's also a great time as well for our listeners and viewers. Check us out on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all across the social media platforms. You can check out the different subscriptions and all the different things we offer and exclusive deals in our description, as well as we wrap up this edition of the Barcelona Podcast. Francesc, I want to thank you for joining me today, and until next time, as we always say,
Forza Barca!